All right, everyone. Give me a few minutes here. We got to get a couple things set up. I got to get Dave in the chat here, so hold on, or in the live broadcast. All right, Dave is on his way. What's up, Dave?
Hi, Ted.
How are you doing?
I'm good.
Good. Good to see you.
Adjust my camera here.
Yeah. Awesome. You doing all right today?
I'm good. Yes, I had a good night's sleep. I have my coffee. Everything ready to go.
Excellent. Yeah, I just got back from coffee myself, so one must do what one has to do.
So, do we have some questions? I haven't even looked yet.
We already have questions, man. There's
Awesome.
people in the live chat right now, and let me see if I can. No promises here if I pull this up. Hey, just to let you know for future reference, if we have some kind of trouble with the feed, then I'll just restart it. So just wait, and I'll bring the invitation back. So.
Okay.
Or if you can't hear me, start waving your arms or something. So
okay.
I don't anticipate trouble, but one never knows. So.
The wonders of modern technology.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm thinking probably what we could do is just start off. Let me give you an introduction here in just a second. And yeah, we've got a couple people in there watching, so this is good. And it says 39 viewers, which is awesome. And I'm going to let you kind of run the discussion. And then do you want to talk for a little while about what you want to share today? And then I can ask you questions as we go, or I'll interrupt you if there's clarification needed, or what do you think?
We can do it either way. I can talk. I'm happy to talk for a while, or we can just start in answering questions.
Well, I'll tell you what. Why don't I start you off with some questions, and because I think probably what the deal is a lot of people are not. We have some people who are very familiar with Ferrania, and they've been kind of following.
I'll give it a little. I can give a little overview.
I think an overview would be good. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Everybody, thank you so much for watching. Glad you joined us at this hour. And if you're in the U.S., sorry, some of you are going to have to get up early. But we're talking today with my dear friend, a longtime Flickr buddy, Dave Bias, who's the U.S. marketing person for Ferrania Film. You're the marketing director. Is that your title?
I don't even have a title yet.
Director sounds official, right?
Yeah. I've been talking with the guys in Italy now for just a little over a year, and I just randomly emailed them one day, and we started talking, and one thing led to another, and here I am. Yes, I will be spearheading operations here in the U.S., and since they're making the film over in Italy, the U.S. will be primarily concentrated on marketing and selling it.
Excellent. That's very cool. So what happened was, it was kind of funny. I had heard about Ferrania, and I just sent them an email via their website, and you were the one who emailed me back, and it was just kind of funny that we actually knew each other. So we got together, just so everybody knows, I was in New York last week. Dave's in New York, and I'm down in Texas right now. And we got together and over coffee and kind of discussed Ferrania. And it's a really interesting story, I think, with what you guys are doing. And I don't know if people realize that Ferrania is actually not a new thing. This is an old company that's been around for a long time and done some really important work in Italy.
Yeah.
You want to talk to that a little bit and kind of tell some of that story? Or?
Sure. And, for anyone who wants the long story, we've been publishing it on our website, the history of this company, and we just published the next part of the history yesterday. Ferrania started in 1923, and it became quickly the Kodak of Italy. It was primarily associated with cinema film. However, they made consumer films as well, 35 millimeter, 120. They made cameras. They were a full-blown photographic company. And then I think part of the reason that most of the people outside of Italy haven't heard of the Ferrania brand is in the mid-'60s they were purchased by 3M. That's actually the second part of the history that we published yesterday, is this 3M era. And during the 3M era, 3M of course sold products under their own brand names, Scotch and Imation and some others. And 3M left the company in '99, and they reverted back to Ferrania. And then I think some of us, myself and maybe a few other nerds out there, bought Solaris Film from Ferrania in the early 2000s. So it's been around, and it's got a very unique stature. It's one of there are only 5 companies ever, and only 4 that are existing today that made color film from nothing, from scratch, and this is one of those factories.
That's awesome. Very cool. So we were talking about also, people might not know, they may have shot on Ferrania before too, because we were talking about back in the older days when they were actually redistributing their own stock through other companies in the U.S. So, like, I think you were telling me in New York when we were talking, if you bought like some random generic brand of film in the drugstore back in the day, if you popped it over the bottom and said "Made in Italy," chances are it was most likely Ferrania that was doing that.
Sure, yeah, and I would say that, to anyone listening or watching this in the future, that if you have expired film in your fridge, look on the boxes. If it's some oddball brand that you've never heard of and you have a roll of it, and if it says "Made in Italy," it's actually Ferrania Film. They made film for supermarkets and drugstores and all kinds of other companies. And they made film for Polaroid. They made film for lomography for a while. They made film for, I even read somewhere they made film for Konica during a brief period of time. And so they were like the filmmakers of record for hundreds and hundreds of different brands. So this was, again, why the Ferrania brand name sort of fell away over the years, if you didn't live in Italy, and why I think a lot of people around the world think, that this is a brand new thing.
Right. It's interesting too. I think it's worth noting too. We're talking about the cinema film. So Ferrania made 35 millimeter, 120, various formats, and they also were known for cinema film, which interestingly enough was Fellini's choice. I know for 8.5, and I don't know if Dolce Vita was shot on that. What was it was a P30 stock or something like that he.
P30, yes. P30 was actually a very, very popular stock among filmmakers. And it got so popular, and especially when 8.5 came out, it got so popular that Ferrania decided to make it into 35 millimeter and 120 formats, and launched this big marketing campaign with the kind of idea that if you wanted to be your own Fellini, you needed to shoot P30 film. And
of course, you'd look exactly like Fellini.
Of course, yeah, no problem. Just use the same film and no eccentric genius necessary. Just
I think when you guys go back into production, you should have a Bresson model. You should, you could really hype that into it to look exactly like these people. The Frank Capra series.
Yeah, right.
No, that's very cool. So in terms of it's interesting where we are now with film and what people are familiar with. I mentioned this when I did a little bit of the preview on what we would be talking about today, and what I think is really exciting about what you guys are talking about at Ferrania is that we live kind of in this day and age where really in the last couple weeks and months that the big news around film seems to be mostly crowded around companies that are discontinuing certain kinds of stock. So I used to shoot a lot of Plus X. Kodak got rid of that. All of a sudden, sometimes they quit doing things in a format, which is interesting. Like I think Neopan was one of them that's only available in 35 now, not 120. And so I think what is significant about Ferrania is like, and it differentiates it from Lomography or Impossible Project because it's like there really is kind of this opening for somebody to legitimately make film again. Do you guys feel that maybe this has left kind of an opening for you to bring this out? Maybe
for
Mark
sure
has a need for it. Sure, you want to talk to that a bit?
Yeah, I mean the simple fact is that the vast majority of the infrastructure that's out there to make film is too big. It's really just too big for the market today. And this is why Ferrania shut down in 2010, because their big machines were just too big. And once you have very hard realities when you're talking about manufacturing. You got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people to pay. You have these massive power bills and all these things that have to be paid to keep these giant facilities running. And Kodak and Fuji, I think, have done their level best to scale down as they can and sort of keep everything moving forward. But as we've seen very clearly, you know, they have a very clear threshold, and when film sales dip below that threshold for any particular format or specific formula, it goes away. You know, they can't lose money selling film just because some of us want to use it. They have to have a certain number of people that want to use it, and it's because the infrastructure to create it is so massive. And what we have in front of us at Ferrania is a really interesting opportunity. We have the giant factory that's all closed down. The buildings were locked and all the machinery protected for several years, waiting for someone to maybe step into the gap. And when our founders got there and they saw the situation as it existed, they found this LRF building. This is another thing that we talk about in detail on our website. The LRF building is the former research and development facility.
Okay.
So the entire Ferrania campus is about 500,000 square meters. I think in a previous interview I said it was 3 million, but that was too many.
It's really big.
It's really big. It's 500,000 square, you know, 1.5 million square feet roughly.
Sure.
And it's a bunch of buildings, and so we have one building, the LRF building, which is 5,000 square meters. And what's inside this building is a miniature version of the big factory.
Okay. Cool,
and
cool.
So what they would do is they would come up with some new formulas, they would make up some chemistry, they would test it on the miniature coater, and once they got it perfected, they would kick it over to the big factory and start making film. So what our team understood was that they could take this small building and just literally cherry pick pieces of machinery from the larger facility and add them into this smaller building to create a factory that it can be flexible, that can respond to the market in a really you know, in a clear way. Like if you know, if you're running these giant machine that's the size of the football field,
right,
and you turn it on, you make film. Like you can't stop it. It makes hundreds of thousands of rolls before you can even turn the machine back off.
I think viewers are really getting excited about hearing that. You know.
Yeah, and so we have a smaller machine that allows us to change things a little quicker, but it's too small. You know, the big machine makes close to 40 million rolls of film a year if you made it all into 35 millimeter film. The small machine doesn't make a tenth of that, and that's too little. The big machine is too much, so we had to figure out some way to pull some pieces together to increase the capacity of the small machine.
So you're trying to meet it, yeah, not really in the middle, but higher than what the small machine will do.
Exactly, as close to in the middle as we can, because honestly, the market really is still very, very strong. When you all things being relative, it's not strong. Not strong for Kodak or Fuji, but it's still very, very strong for a company that can create a factory that's the right size for the market. Right. And once they identified that there was a potential to do this, they've now spent since July of 2013. They moved into that building. They've fixed all the machinery that's already in that building. They've purchased some of the less expensive machinery from a number of the buildings. We now have, for example, you know, every format of film that you make needs its own little mini production line to spool it, put it on spools, put it in cartridges, put it in boxes. These are called converting machines. I tend to call them finishing machines. So we've already scavenged the converting machines for lots and lots of different formats. We bought the stuff for scrap prices with the seed money that they raised a couple of years ago, and these things are now waiting for us to move them into a storage facility so that we can, at some point in the future, hook them into our production. We still have a number of machines that we still have to buy. And we are in front of a little bit of a deadline because over the next 6 months, many of these buildings are slated to be destroyed. They've given us just as long as they can. It's time now for the previous owners of these buildings to move on and to maybe bring in new development. So Nicola, our founder, has been in very close contact with the Italian government who own these buildings now. They've actually helped us out quite a bit over time, and they spent a lot of money refurbishing our LRF building, for example, so that once we moved in, everything worked well. New power grid, new HVAC, fixed the roof, did some structural changes. So, it's been a very, very long haul for the past year. Just all the technical detail of cleaning the building, making sure all the machinery, which has been sitting, in these buildings for 2 years without being used, making sure that when you fire it up, it doesn't, fly to pieces. And so far, so good. We're at a point now where, they're in the very beginning testing phases. They're mixing up some chemistry to see how that works, and the way we're looking at it, we have a factory. We can make a small amount of film. This is just to make everyone clear on this point. We can do this today.
Right.
We haven't done it yet, but everything is there. We have the people, we have the machines, we have a lot of the materials even to make a small batch of film. But we're looking at this really in the long term, and to stabilize the business and to, I think, really more than anything, quit discontinuing and start continuing. I think this is a really important thing that we can offer.
It's hard, and I think you're faced with several challenges. I mean, and I think you've been speaking to this too. And I think this is one thing that people need to understand, because there are a lot of us that love film, and I think that particularly our generation, people who are alive now, we're used to, okay, we know there is a factory somewhere, and there's this machine, and these materials go in one side, and our cool stuff comes out the other end. And you've been talking to this for a while. Is what goes into film production? Not just it's the materials, it's the process, it's the business model. But I mean, it's not like you just go open a factory and do this. You have to have light-sealed rooms. You have to have humidity control. You have to have dust control. There's a lot of really expensive things to go into this. Being the former business model that Kodak, Fuji, a lot of these big titans. I mean, if we're talking, you said those machines in there are capable of just 35mm stock, 30 to 40 million rolls of film a year.
Yeah.
And it seems like for Kodak and Fuji, that's the business model that they've been operating on.
And I would guess, I'm not sure, I would guess that Kodak and Fuji's facilities are even bigger.
Oh, I'm sure they are, but I'm just saying those types of numbers are what they're used to selling, and that's what those businesses are set up to do, with employees, with facilities, with materials. And it's interesting, you guys, you're doing it right, and I think that that's really commendable and really cool. And this is not, I want to clarify too, this is not like some product you're going to see at Urban Outfitters that has this trendy effect that is really not all that great. It's these guys doing their best to try film stock. I mean, this is going to be the real deal once it starts rolling.
Well, we would love to, of course, sell it in Urban Outfitters, but I think your point is that we're not making we're making very straight up, easy to use, 100 ASA, daylight balance, chrome film that looks the best that we can possibly do.
Sure.
We're not worried about whether it's tinted a certain color, those kind of things. I think that's what you're alluding to. And you're right. I mean, we have 6 guys on our team right now, and they were all trained by 3M, and they worked at Ferrania for many years. And they're scientists and they're technicians, and they are only interested in making the very best thing that they can make. And we have a lot of 3M's formulas. We have some tweaking to do because not everything that goes into making film 20 years ago is still available on the market today in terms of raw materials. So, but this was the last film that was made by Ferrania. It was actually made by some of the guys that work for us now. So
okay, so
they're
you're
the most familiar.
Just to clarify, you're talking about the film stock we're talking about was the last film that Ferrania produced, which
Correct.
was a 100 ASA color chrome film, so it was non-reversal, it was positive.
Right. And since it's the last thing that they produced, and since we have the formula, and since we have a lot of the chemistry even, you know, why reinvent the wheel, so to speak?
Sure.
We still have to make sure that the factory works, and so the more variables we can control for, the better. And one of the variables we can control for is not just coming up with some brand new formula all of a sudden, but using something that they know worked in that same building before, and trying to simply recreate that as our first step into this business. And I think it should be clear to everyone, making film is extremely hard, you know, as you alluded. To make it from scratch, you have to buy cotton, which you shovel into a machine that turns it into acetate. Then you have to take that acetate and put it on a machine, and then you have to mix up a bunch of chemistry. And the chemistry is like 8, 9, 10 layers of chemicals that have to each be laid down in a specific order and less than the thickness of a human hair on very specialized machines, a coater machine, which we have. And then there's a layer that you put on top to prevent it from being scratched. You know, sometimes a layer that you put on the bottom, an anti-halation layer. So once you get it all coated onto the plastic, you have a spool that's maybe a meter wide, 3 or 4 feet wide, and then you have to put that in another machine that cuts it into strips, and then you chop it to length, and then you put it onto spools and into boxes, and all this has to happen in the dark, of course. And so it's incredibly, and I've really just drastically simplified what you know, people worked on for, you know, 20, 30, 40 years before they ever even invented it, and then, you know, a process that was honed by these companies over the course of I don't know, close to 100 years. And, you know, we're trying to simply take what has been done in the past and rethink the process that it's done, you know, so rethink the way the factory works, so that we don't need a staff of 4,000 people like Ferrania did at its peak to make this product, because that is just unfeasible. And, you know, there's, even in talking about it, I'm oversimplifying. It's so complicated, sure. And there's a lot of the, you know, day-to-day detail that I don't live in Italy, and I've not been over there yet. So you know, these guys have really dug into a very, very difficult task. And what's great about it is that over the past year, being an observer like I've been from a distance, I've seen them go from, you know, we're not quite sure exactly what we're going to do. We know we want to do this kind of stuff, but, you know, there were at that time way too many unknowns to say anything for sure. And today, you know, in the past year, a lot of these questions have been answered. A lot of the small problems have been solved. A lot of the bigger problems have been fleshed out in greater detail. And, you know, it's been interesting to see very clear progress, even though it's not been the kind of progress that's really all that sexy to share.
Sure, sure, and you're obviously under a bit of a time constraint now.
More so now than ever, yeah.
Yeah, right. I think one thing too to clarify too. So I mean, and if you can't talk about this, I totally understand. But we talked a little bit about what the first stock would be that you guys are looking to produce, which is actually the color slide film at 100 ASA. Can you talk about? Well, the other thing too is I know, you know, a lot of people, like when you mentioned somebody's going to be making film, they immediately, because I think when I went into the chat room before I started the video, there were already a couple people saying, oh, you're going to make a color infrared and stuff. And I think obviously one day you'd love to be able to do as much as possible, as much as viable. But starting out, I mean, just for people to understand the difference, you know, you have this entire assembly of machines, and we talked a little bit about the coding process, and then what you were calling the finisher, or I can't remember what the term that they were using was, but basically when you actually start to spool it, put it into rolls and box it, and what goes into that. So like even something like if you consider like a 620 format, which is really similar to 120, but the spool is slightly smaller, thank you Kodak, you know, that is a whole nother process on a machine. Can you talk about the formats that you guys would like to start with at all?
Yeah, sure. You know, part of this was decided because we knew that they were the most popular, but the survey that we did recently on our website really confirmed it for us in a big way, and gave us, I think, a little bit better idea of the proportion of these first 4 types of film that we want to make. So I think the other thing that we need to point out is that we're going to be making both still film and cinema film. And so we chose the 2 most popular formats of each. We're going to be making 35mm and 120 still film, and we're going to be making Super 8 and 16mm cinema film, all in the same 100 ASA chrome format initially.
Right. Right. Start.
Yeah, and I think, you know, again, I may be reiterating, but to make just this one formula first should not be construed as that's all we're ever going to make. There are obviously many different types of film that we want to make, many different formats that we want to make in the future, but you have to start somewhere, and we're starting with the one that we know with some certainty that we can make without a lot of problem. You know,
well, that's exactly what I was alluding to. And actually, it's funny. I mean, I could say this to protect you guys, but, you know, it's funny because that's why I said you don't have to talk about it if you can't. Sometimes when you're doing something, like when I do this show, if I announce I'm going to do something and then all of a sudden, for whatever reason, something intervenes and it gets delayed, people start holding me to it. So I think it's important to know that you guys have big plans for this, but what you can reveal at this time is what's probable.
Well, you know, I'm the same as everybody. You know, I want everything now.
Absolutely.
I want it to be like cranking out, you know, thousands of boxes of film today, and in every kind of format that I ever want to put in one of my weird cameras. You know, but the reality is that, you know, each of these things takes time, and plus, you know, just to give you one other example, you know, every day that we don't make 35mm still film, that we're making some other kind of film, you know, there's an opportunity cost. It's like, okay, do we make 35mm today, or do we make 9x12 sheet film? You know,
right.
Not as many people use 9x12 sheet film, so maybe we make 35mm again today. You know, and these are decisions that we're going to have to make in the future. And I think the important point to note is that we have tons of formulas already that 3M developed over the years that we can take forward. So it really compresses the research and development time to a very small amount of time. And we have designed in our heads and somewhat on paper, and we are in the process of getting all the machinery that we need to create this situation where we can switch formats or switch from Chrome to C41, or, you know, we will be able to do that much more easily in the future if we're able to really get the factory set up exactly the way we want.
Well, I think that's what's most interesting. And when we got together in New York, one of the things I was very impressed with is that the whole concept of what Ferrania is going to be this round is much different than what you normally think of as a film company. I mean, you're really looking at ways to progress and change how you're producing it to see if you can accommodate some of these smaller markets. Yeah, I think that's really commendable.
There's no other way to do it, honestly. I mean, no one in their right mind would reopen the Ferrania factory, you know, the way it is, and try to somehow make 30 million rolls of film a year and sell them. It costs too much money to turn the lights on. You know, it costs too much money to hire all the people that you need to run all the machines. So we've spent an enormous amount of effort trying to rethink the idea of what a film factory can be, and it just so happens that across the street in all these buildings, we have the industrial scale machines at our disposal, so we don't have to rebuild them from scratch, which would also be very cost prohibitive. So,
right, yeah, sure.
You know, these are machines that cost millions of dollars when they were originally built, we're buying them for their weight in steel. So we're buying them at a tiny fraction of their original cost, and this is the only way that we have a viable situation in front of us. You know, I don't care how altruistic an investor you might be able to find. You're not going to find someone that's going to plunk down $10 million to build filmmaking machines from scratch. It's, you know,
well,
it would take
also
so long to make that money back that, you know, even if you found some like a true angel investor, like it would, that person would have to have their head examined if they really felt like it was viable.
Sure, sure. Well, and it's also worth noting too. I mean, these machines are not in production. It's not like you can people in the U.S. know what I'm talking about. The Maytag repairman doesn't come down.
There isn't a film machine factory that you can just like knock on the door and say, "Hey, I need an industrial scale coder." You know,
you can just order it online, right? It's like an Amazon Prime thing.
Maybe get it from Alibaba.
Alibaba built it. I think that's cool. You know, we do have some questions. My friend Carla, I asked if she could. She's a big film nerd and one of my favorites. And she emailed over some questions that I think some of these would be interesting to take. And I really like one of these that she's asked. She says, you've made a significant effort in terms of outreach to the film community on social media. Your first survey had over 2,700 responses, and the Ferrania team still managed to quickly turn around that data and demonstrate the alignment between the company's expectations and what the market is looking for. We've been talking to a lot of this, and what your potential customer base is asking for. How do you expect to continue to get and use the community feedback as Film Ferrania grows?
The way we're seeing it, there is no film company without the film community. Plain and simple. That's you know, from my own personal perspective, it's a big reason why I got involved with this project, because I felt like the way film has been sold for the past 150 years is why film is dying now. You know, the infrastructure to make it and the way it's sold, and from this kind of monolithic standpoint of, here's what you can have, please buy it. You know, we'll make nice magazine ads that, you know, spill a bunch of technical details on you, and you know, it's I don't know, it was very cold to me, and we've seen the market change very clearly. I think Flickr was really the first major way that everyone who still shot film could connect, and I think it's even gotten deeper since then.
Sure.
And you know, I saw very little outreach from some of the big makers to connect with the people who are actually really using the product on a day-to-day basis. It's in the past, I think if you were a professional and you bought 20 cases of film a month, you could talk to Kodak or Fuji, but anybody less than that was really just another customer who, you know, had to buy the film wherever they could find it. We don't think that any of this is possible or sustainable moving forward. We think you have to listen to the people out there that use the product. Like it's that simple. The survey was, you know, truly a way to take the pulse of the people who had already kind of found out about what we were doing, and, you know, the sort of early adopters, so to speak.
Right.
And, you know, I put the survey questions together, and I worked, you know, with my coworkers. But when I was putting them together, I threw every kind of film format in there that I could think of, assuming that at least a few of them would get a big fat 0 in their responses. And
sure. Did you get any zeros on any of those?
Not one.
Wow, that's amazing.
127, 126, 110, 9x12, like all these odd formats that
110 of all things. I love it.
There were, you know, a significant number of people in every single format, and a lot of the motion picture formats as well. We even had people. I put IMAX, you know, 65 millimeter IMAX movie film in there as a, you know, do you use this? And yes, we had tons of people respond that use IMAX film.
That's cool. That's
you know,
really
so,
cool.
And I don't assume that they were amateurs. I would assume that they were professionals.
I hope so. I mean, I think you're going to need feedback from professionals. I mean, I know there are professionals out there that would love to do film, whether it be cine or still. I mean.
Yeah. Well, you know, famously, J.J. Abrams got a group of film directors together who love analog film and lobbied Kodak to continue making cinema film for a little while longer. And, you know, the market took a huge nosedive, for sure, in the mid-2000s. You know, I think roughly corresponding to the announcement of the first iPhone.
Yeah.
You know, maybe just coincidence. But it had already been kind of, you know, tapering off, and then it just took a huge nosedive. But I know from my experience, and I know from talking to a lot of other people in various parts of the industry, in stores, other manufacturers, other, you know, people who know something about the larger film business, the general consensus is that it dropped, but it didn't drop to zero. It just dropped to a level that is not really sustainable by these huge manufacturing operations.
Well, Kodak's zero is a different level than it's not flatlined.
Right,
it's just
exactly.
up here, and their margin is here, and they need to make that, and it fell below.
And it's a factor of, you know, it used to be billions of people shot a roll of film once or twice a week or more. Now it's millions, you know, and when you build an industrial operation to deliver billions of something, and then the market drops down to millions, it might as well be zero, because you get to a point where it's just not financially feasible to make, you know, 100,000 of something when you used to be making 10 million.
You know, and we're gonna. I'm kind of improvising here with some of this, but what's interesting is you and I, when we were having coffee in New York, we're talking about this, and you know, it's what a lot of this sounds like when you hear of somebody like Kodak or somebody the magnitude of some of these big companies, and you know, a lot of writers, especially when you're talking about the movie industry with Hollywood, you start to get this implication of it's a sign of the times, it's film versus digital. And I know that you and I both are pretty passionate about the fact that that's a really dumb delineation. There's no film versus digital. If you're doing a film, like a movie, you're Quentin Tarantino, you're Robert Rodriguez, you're somebody on that level, J.J. Abrams doing Star Wars, you've got to consider, if you're shooting that picture like on a red or you're shooting digitally, you think of all the takes you're going to have, all the footage you're going to wind up with. And yes, the camera was cheaper, but you've got to find a way to store that and have redundancy on backup. I mean, digital comes with a set of issues too. It's on a smaller scale for photographers because our files are smaller in general. Yeah. But in terms of digital, I think it's really interesting, and you guys being a smaller company, to say, you know, it's not about that. Film is a way that you can back your stuff up on a physical medium as well. You probably will scan it, and your usage for a lot of it will be digital, whether it's Flickr, Instagram, whatever. You know, talk a little bit to those terms. I mean,
I basically, you know, I hope we can convey as a company, and you know, and I know me personally, I feel this way. I think the whole argument between of film versus digital is just dead. It's over. We argued it for years. Everyone's got good points on both sides of the equation.
And it's boring. I mean,
ultimately, yeah. You know, if you feel the need to protect your position because you invested a lot in digital or analog equipment, then sure, you can make the argument. But I think for most people, we use both. And we like the fact that we can use both.
Absolutely, it's the option.
It's about a choice. Yeah, it's really, for me, for you know, my work previously at Impossible and now with Ferrania, it's all about having a choice. And to me, for me personally, digital, there are lots of different cameras out there and everything, but I don't really consider them to be. I consider them all as one choice. You know, there's digital writ large, or I can shoot Portra, or I can shoot Tri-X, or I can shoot Superior, or I can shoot Velvia, or I can shoot, hopefully in the very near future, some Ferrania film. And each of these things gives me something different. And I don't have to post-process. I don't have to sit in front of my computer for 8 more hours after I've already been out in the field. I can, you know, for me, I like having the choices. When it comes to photography, period, whether you're talking about movies or stills, whether you're talking about film or digital, I think everyone has something that they see in their head, And whatever medium you choose to get that out into the world is valid, you know. And the whole like push towards modernism and oh, film is a thing of the past or it's old-fashioned or whatever. I just, you know, we still carve things out of marble. We still paint with actual paint. You know, these things are choices for artists, and they'll never really go away as long as there can be a manufacturer that can make them viably, you know, and without losing money. So.
Well, but that's what's interesting, and I think that people should understand that what is separating Ferrania from a lot of things out there with the Kodaks and the bigger type. I mean, it's a different size company, and I hate to drop Gary Vaynerchuk's name in here, but when you see somebody like that who's really talking about businesses changing, and I think this relates to what Carla's question was with the you know, how do you engage with the audience and the film community, and this is a big deal because you've got to have your finger on that pulse. I mean, a company the size of Kodak. And I did know Christina, who was they called her the social media person. They did what all big companies do. They can't turn really fast. Everything has to go through a committee and a bunch of decision making. And this friend of mine who worked with them was in their European division, and they finally carved out a couple positions for social media people, and her job was to tweet. And she did the best she could do with damage control. She was way better than what they allowed her to do. And eventually they, you know, closed that whole division off. And she was laid off. But I think that's what, you know, a company that size, their audience is not this smaller community. And I think you guys have realized that yours is. And you're willing to listen to those and go with that and take those suggestions. And yeah. I commend you guys on that. I think you're the perfect person for that job, by the way.
Thanks, Ted. You know, the community that's out there, I've been part of it for many, many years. You know, I think going back to when I started mouthing off on toycamera.com, on the forums, and you know, to me, this is definitely where the market has shifted. I still know some professionals who shoot film for sure, and I know a lot that want to shoot film that have to shoot digital because of you know, the way digital has become the norm for commercial photography. You know, to change as the market changes is difficult for, you know, the bigger the company is, and you're right. Once you get all these levels of checks and balances, which are necessary for big companies, it inherently makes it difficult to change with the times.
Right.
And you know, then you again are faced with this stark situation of like, okay, fewer and fewer people are buying film. We're not a foundation. You know, we're not a not-for-profit. We have to keep the power on, and we have to keep all these, you know, thousands of people employed. So once that film drops below a certain number, we're just going to stop making it and shift our focus to the ones that still do sell big numbers. I mean, I'm sure Kodak still sells a whole lot of Tri-X film. I know I still buy it regularly. And I would say that part of the reason why we can still buy Tri-X film is because everyone buys a lot of it. It's like a feedback loop.
Right.
And I encourage everyone to continue buying Tri-X because I want to use it, and you know, at least for the rest of my life. You know, the simple fact is that in order for there to be film for the next 100 years, and we're literally, I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but this is literally the way we're thinking about this. We're trying to set up a situation that can be the main producer of analog film for the next 100 years. And because we do think it's viable. We do think that there are plenty of people that will use it for lots of different reasons.
Right.
We have people looking to buy X-ray film from us, and you know, there's a company in the north of Europe that backs up data on cinema film.
That's amazing. And, you know, actually, that's interesting. That's a good thing to talk about. It's
lots of different ways it can be used.
Right.
We need to find all those people and bring them together. You know, and I think the best way to start is to go where everybody is already. You know, on the Art of Photography podcast. You know, online. You know,
everyone's on the Art of Photography.
Without the internet, there would, you know, we wouldn't know about each other. And,
sure.
You know, there's something that the community brings to the equation that makes it, we don't have to like do market surveys. We can do a survey on our website, and thousands of people will respond, way more than I ever thought would respond to it. And, this gives us a good roadmap moving forward. And we plan to take the pulse of the community on a regular basis to make sure that we're doing the right things.
I think that's really cool. So just to recap a little bit, and I'm going to push you up to the threshold of something here, but so we're looking at a color slide film at 100 ASA, available in 4 formats, 2 for still, 2 for cinema. So
Right.
we'll have 35 mil, we'll have 120 millimeter, we'll have 8 millimeter and 16 millimeter for shooting cinema. And I think based on everything you've been telling us, that is a very reasonable place to start. And I told you this when we were talking earlier, is that I think it's particularly smart to start with slide film because there's not a real definite competitor. That's something that's actually been going extinct pretty quickly. So that's what we can kind of expect going forward. And what we're looking at is you guys have got to kind of get into production before the end of the year. I'm not going to say what it is because we agreed not to, but people need to stay tuned over the next few weeks because there is going to be some activity on this and some stuff that you will be ready to announce.
For sure. Like I said, we can't say anything until the day we can say it.
Absolutely, and I explained that earlier. You don't want to do that because
we just can't. Because there have already been. The last year has been. Some months it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and other months it's 2 steps back and 1 step forward. So, they turned on a machine one day and it blew the breaker in the whole building. There are little things that come up that cause delays, and we live in an internet culture that, for all of its benefits, also gives people very little patience.
Sure.
Sure. So if you say something and you don't deliver on it in a reasonable period of time or on the schedule that you announced, then you're held to it. And I have no problem with this. I do the same thing to other people.
Yeah, I've had it happen on the show. I mean, it's totally.
But on the other side of it, I've realized I really have to, I have a tendency to just blab, so I have to really watch what I say because I can say something that 20 people out there will latch onto and be like, but you said this, and I'm like, oh, okay, but things are changing all the time. The situation over in Italy is very fluid, and it's a very, very small team. It's 8 people trying to bring together a factory. I mean, just this one building used to employ 200 people.
Yeah, so it gives you an idea of the variance in scale we're dealing with now. Well, I think we can say this. You would be willing to come back on here, and we'll keep people posted once announcements are ready to be made.
Yeah, for sure.
Very quickly. Actually, Carla had another question on here that I want to address too, because I think it's kind of interesting. And the question is, what sort of results can photographers and cinematographers expect from your first batch or batches of film? So will you put out a beta version? And she's kind of talking about this. And I think we talked about that to an extent, and it's important for people to understand that the formulas are not new, particularly this first round. This is a color film. I think you said it was the last film that was made by Ferrania. So it seems like maybe the beta version of all this is probably going to be more in terms of the process. And I think you guys have some stuff in mind in terms of meeting expectations or not, underserving expectations on that. But are you thinking of this as a beta release at all, or when you try to?
Oh yeah, of course. We have a very clear limit on the amount that we can make.
Right.
Within a certain time period. Like by the end of this year, we think we can make 1 batch. That's really not a whole lot of film. It's a great way to start, and we do plan to offer ways for people to test it. And when I say test it, I don't mean get it for free and use it.
Right.
I mean test it. Like shoot 3 different frames in 3 different lighting situations. Like we'll have basically a series of things that we need to convey back to the guys at the factory that, okay, when you shot it this way, did it do this? So we will have some sort of testing program. I think our inclination is going to be to open it up as wide as possible and let anyone jump in who wants to. But we don't have images today.
Yeah, that was one of the
Hopefully,
questions I asked you. I said, I'm going to promote you guys. Could you like send me some JPEG? You're like, there is no film.
yeah, because there is no film, and I mean, we get emails every day saying, "Okay, where can I buy your film? I want to buy your film."
Right.
And we were like, "Oh, you know, it's so it like crushes you almost."
That's a happy thing though, because I mean there is a demand and people are that rabid about it. I think that's why it's smart that you guys are really focusing around this to listening and involving the community and making them feel a part of this. That's cool. I mean,
yeah, you know, there's it's I was trying to think of some reference, but you know, nothing will be released before its time.
Sure.
You know, if people want to know roughly what the film may look like, if you went online and you Googled Scotch Chrome 100 and you found some images that were shot on the film, this is maybe somewhat what it'll look like. It's hard to say because I don't know what's out there.
That's at least the formula that you're going to be looking for.
It's the formula, you know, and when I say that they made it last, it wasn't released under that brand name.
Right.
It was made for somebody else because the last few years they mostly just made film for other brands. But it's the one, again, it's the one that everyone's most familiar with. It's the one that has the highest chance of success running through the machines for this inaugural batch. And so, like I said before, you have to control for as many variables as you can. So, you know, let's make the film that everyone is most confident that will be successful.
Sure.
Yeah.
What I want to do, since with the time we have left remaining, I have one other question from Carla that I love that I think is like really fun. And then what I'm going to try and do, and I'm going to give everybody heads up on here. Basically, this whole broadcast, I think we're doing better than Apple did when they announced the iPhone, but I hope. But what I'm going to do is, right now I can't see the questions coming in live.
I should have worn a
day.
turtleneck.
Yeah, to the Steve. One more thing. So I can't see the chat going on live. So I want to ask Carla's last question. Then what I'm going to do is I will very volatilely, off the bubblegum baling wire that we've got set up here, I'm going to try and bring up the chat, and we'll see if there's any questions that people are asking in the chat. And this is one thing that I wish YouTube would figure out. I could see how many people are watching us. I could see Dave. I could see that we're still live. And that's all I could see. So the question Carla had, and if this ends up being the question that ends this, I think it's a good one. Do you anticipate that you'll be running factory tours or local meetup events for the global film community to broaden exposure to your product and connect with your customers? I kind of like to think of this as there's a brewery down the street every Thursday night. They have a little thing. Are you guys going to open it up to tours one day or anything like that?
I think as much as we can, we will. Of course, most of a film factory is completely in the dark.
And you can't like flip on a flashlight. You can simulate that experience.
So it would have to be on days when we're scheduled to shut down the machines and maybe do maintenance or something like that. We haven't really thought that far ahead because it's literally 8 people trying to rebuild a factory, and they're really kind of focused on that specific idea. There have been visits to the factory already. There's a German company called Wittner that makes Super 8 black and white film, I think also 16mm. And they visited the factory and published something about it on their website last year, actually. You know, when you talk about the community and reaching out to the community and being open and transparent with what we're doing, of course we want tours.
Right.
And as a little side note, part of our deal with the Italian government, so the Italian government moved in and bought all these buildings and kept them from being destroyed and looked around for people to carry Ferrania forward. And Nicola Baldini and Marco Pagni show up, and everything, you know, moves to where it is today. But in the future, because the government has given us a really amazing support system, and they want something in return, as you might guess.
Sure.
Well, the 5th floor of our building is a theater.
Really?
It was like a screening room theater where they would go up and test materials that they had just made downstairs. And the government very much wants us to turn this theater into a school.
Wow.
One of our founders, Marco Pagni, is one of the leading film restoration people in the world, and the government would like us to actually move his film restoration school into the Ferrania building and offer it, as part of a curriculum to the wider public. And also we could use this to do all kinds of other training and event kind of stuff at the factory. Now, the one caveat there is that the factory's in the middle of the woods. It's in a gorgeous part of Italy. It's only 15 kilometers from the Mediterranean Sea, but if you have Google Earth, if you type in Cairo Montanotte, Italy, it'll zoom you right down to very close to where the factory is, and it's very viewable on Google Earth.
I'll link that in the show notes. That's cool.
It's a little pocket of a valley in rolling hills in a gorgeous national park that with very little around it immediately. So you literally feel like you're driving through the woods, and then all of a sudden there's all these industrial buildings. So it's a little out of the way. Our founder, I think, has to drive 2.5 hours from where he lives to get to the factory.
That's dedication. Yeah.
Yeah, and so factory tours, yes. Getting there, I think, will be on the individual person.
Well, we'll figure
it's
something
a bit of a trip.
out. You guys, you're like the craft brewery of the photography industry. I really like that. That's awesome.
I didn't even think about that, but I think there's some parallels there that work for sure.
I think there is. I mean, you don't have other people doing this, but at the same time, though, you have that kind of connection to the community, and I think you also, in a weird way, are part of this maker culture kind of thing that's sprung back up. Where people are like, it's this use your hands and do it yourself, because it certainly sounds like the people that Marco and those guys that are working on Ferrania right now, and there's a real passion and drive to do this, to drive 2 hours, and I'm sure that guy is working at least an 80-hour week and probably spending the night there sometimes.
Yeah, I don't think he doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, it's enormous,
Yeah, I mean, I catch him, Italy's 6 hours ahead of my time, and I catch him, sometimes 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, his time.
Wow.
And we have conversations. He is plus he's also visiting many other people in the industry who need one or more components.
Yeah, sure. Smart move, actually.
Just as a small example, everyone knows about Adox. Adox is a filmmaker in Germany, and they make great black and white products, and they were an early. They reached out to Nicola very early in the process, and he went up and met them, and they've been talking to him ever since on about one thing or another. And Adox is just one of hundreds of smaller businesses that that make a good product and that have a market and that want to keep making what they're making, but they have to buy one or more semi-finished materials from one of the big players.
Yeah, sure.
And those supplies have started to get a little unreliable, according to lots of people that we've talked to.
Absolutely.
Either there are delays, or the prices have gone up, or these other things. And
sometimes it's inconsistency of the materials. I've even noticed with a lot of papers and things like that. It's really difficult to do darkroom printing today, like it used to be.
Yeah. I think the one clear example that we have that's existing today is Ilford.
Yeah.
Ilford was a giant company who, through trial by fire, managed to scale themselves down to the right size. And now they're chugging right along. They're making new products. They introduced a new panoramic pinhole at Photokina and want to know if everyone wants to buy it before they actually go out and make it.
That's cool.
I think they're doing the right thing. They're talking to the community. They're finding out what people want, and they're delivering a top quality product at a production rate that they can sustain well into the future. And so Ilford is our model to some degree.
It's interesting too, because we haven't talked about some of the smaller people. Ilford. We were talking about, I can't remember what we were saying, but there was some deal with AGFA too. And does AGFA still exist as a company, or is it the brand that exists, or sure?
Yeah. So when I was talking about the Gang of Five,
right?
Kodak was the first one to make color film. Agfa was second. Ferrania was third. A Soviet company called Svema was the fourth one, and Svema is now completely gone. And then Fuji was the last one actually to make color film, last one to enter the market. And now Fuji and Kodak became, 1 and 2, kind of bouncing back and forth between 1 and 2. Svema disappeared. Ferrania shut down. Agfa got sort of chopped up into smaller pieces. There is no centralized Agfa company that has all the same machinery that the old Agfa company had.
Okay, gotcha.
It's now there's still an Agfa company. They still make film, but they are concentrated mostly in the industrial market. There's still an Agfa brand. I'm not entirely sure, but I think it's actually licensed from the main Agfa company.
Yeah, I think
put together by a smaller company. So, and then there were various facilities in Germany that that Agfa had to leave behind when they sort of got broken up, and those have all been either destroyed or picked up by other smaller companies who use this machine to do this or this machine to do this. But there's not this. Agfa is no longer the self-contained kind of end-to-end unit that it was before. Now, again, though, in Agfa's case, this was actually good for them. It was good that they split into these smaller pieces, because all of these smaller pieces are now way more viable as companies than the big giant Agfa would have been, today.
So again, I mean, forced to change with the times. I mean, that's what it is.
Yeah, and I don't mean, I think I've been kind of talking from a personal standpoint through most of this. I don't mean to disparage anybody who makes film, and I don't mean to claim that we're going to, take over the business. I think we all believe in this company that there is no industry without an industry. Like you can't just have one person doing everything. We need to support the business, the industry on a wider basis than simply selling rolls of film to individuals. Right. We want to make sure that if Adox needs to use our machine to coat some film, that this is a possibility. We want to make sure that there's the company that backs up the data on film. If they need new materials, we want to be there to make sure that they're provided.
Yeah, it's kind of like colleagues versus competitors, kind of.
Very much so. We have really done a lot of outreach. Nicola especially has traveled all over Europe, meeting all these smaller companies, all of whom need one or more things that they're having trouble getting. And maybe they can do packaging, but they can't do coating. Maybe they can do coating, but can't do spooling. So we simply want to try to set up a situation that supports the wider industry, and we want to make the film that we can make. We think that you can't really be selective. We can't focus on just cinema film, for example. We have to make cinema and still, and we can't really just focus on the consumer market. We have to be there to support the entire industry in some way.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. That's really cool. All right, well, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to pull up the chat here, and if it crashes us, it crashes us, and I apologize in advance to folks, but let's see what happens here, and this may be, hold on a second. I think next time what I'll do is I'll see if I can get somebody else to be a moderator in here. Let's see. I knew I'd do that. All right. You can still hear me, right?
I can. I was just checking to see if I can see any questions, and I can't on my end.
Yeah.
Looks like just a regular old Google Hangout to me.
Well, it's interesting. And Mark Hood, who's a big fan of the show, he says that, I mean, it's just a comment. He says, I doubt there's room for 6 companies making film, but there's room for companies that have a passion for it. I think that's kind of what you've been speaking to. I think that's
a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Much more succinct than my way.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I mean, seriously, there's barely room. If you look at the business model that Kodak and Fuji are under, there's barely enough room for them to all be competing. I mean, it's a different market. It's in the 80s and into the 90s when pro photographers all shot 35 mil. I mean, they were buying it by the case, and there was no alternative to that. It's so much different now, But it's about offering options. It's about offering as a passion.
Yeah. Stores were buying it by the truckload, by the container.
Right.
Now they might be buying it by the pallet, and consumers were buying it, especially professionals, always in very, very large numbers because that was how you got the best deal.
Right.
And yeah, I'd say by and large those days are behind us. It's a matter of finding everyone out there who still uses analog film and making sure that they know about us and that they know that we're here to try to take this forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody else said, sorry, here's another question. And we were kind of talking about this earlier, but I think it's an interesting way of phrasing this. Gregory Drew asks, do you think the technology will ever be viable to merge digital and film?
I read a lot of sci-fi. As computing becomes more and more organic, we have OLEDs now. We have, I don't discount the idea that there could be nanoparticle stuff that could be coated on film that would produce an electronic image, but that's not really the point.
Yeah.
It's digital is digital and analog is analog, and I don't know that merging them is really. I don't know. Like, to me, that just doesn't really seem necessary.
Yeah.
I think digital capture will continue to get better and better and better.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think there will always. I mean, there's still people that make salt prints and do wet plate and tintypes. It's a matter of what medium do you want to use to make an image. And sure, maybe one day down the line there'll be some sort of merging of film with digital capture, but I think we're technologically still pretty far away from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also important to note on there that, I mean, I think for most people out there, for our uses now, I mean, digital and analog have merged on our end, and whether that's a film you're producing for a movie theater or whether that's images you're going to take and share on the internet, I mean, and yeah, to what degree they do, I mean, sure, and we'll see how that plays out. It's interesting. I'm getting a lot of questions in the chat right now about pricing and all this stuff, and I want to reiterate to everybody, if you may have just joined us. So what we're doing right now today is we want to tell a story about Ferrania. This is what I found so fascinating with Dave. They do have some stuff that they will be announcing very soon, and I will, threaten or twist Dave's arm into getting him back on here. I think it's fair to say that pricing is not going to shock anyone necessarily, or I mean, we probably don't need to get into the discussion because I think it's not.
Well, I mean, we just don't know.
Yeah, you just don't know.
We literally just don't know at this point.
But I think it's important also to say, though, I mean, we're talking about you guys have obviously done a lot of market research and tried to find a niche that is going to be viable for this. So it's not going. I mean, there will be a way it will all work. I think it's fair.
Yeah, and we understand that. I mean, me as a consumer, I understand that there's a limit on what I'm willing to pay for a roll of film. Part of the reason we asked the question in the survey of, try to estimate what you think it costs you, not just for the film, but for film, processing, scanning, your time, the opportunity cost of taking it to the lab versus mailing it to a lab, these things. Like, what do you think you actually spend on a roll of film? And, everyone assumes that they... well, first of all, I felt like everyone really undervalued their own time. Because
that's interesting. And real quick before you go on with this, and I hope everybody's paying attention because we said that earlier, and you guys may have tuned in late and missed it. But Ferrania and mainly Dave put this together. They did a big survey. It's on their website, and after we're done recording this,
it's closed now. Show notes. Sorry, we had to close it at some point.
Well, do you have the results?
The results are up there. Yes.
Yeah, let me link to that because I just want to show people that what kinds of things you asked and all that. Anyway, back up. So you were asking people in general, what do you feel like the value of a roll of film is, and this included, you actually purchasing the film stock, your time, and then the development, and then that's where.
Yeah, I mean, if you look into everything, every cent that you spend on a roll of film, there's, I don't know, driving your car and spending money on the gas. I mean, there's
a lot to it. Sure.
You can get as like detailed about it as you want, but we just wanted to, in a general sense, what do you perceive that you spend on every single roll of film that you shoot, and some people put a really low number because I think they were afraid to put a higher number, thinking that we would just charge that much, which is not the way it's going to work.
Right.
But I think a lot of people really gave it an honest effort, and they were, saying $40, $50 a roll if you factor in time and all these other kinds of things. And of course, depending on whether you shoot Super 8 film or 16 millimeter film, those rolls are even more expensive per roll.
Because the stock and processing costs a lot on those.
So, we really wanted to get a sense from people of what they feel like they spend, and this was mostly in an effort to make sure that we felt we were right. I have assumptions about how much I spend on a roll of film, and I think it's expensive, of course, because I spend a lot of time on it. And when I used to be a designer, I got paid a certain amount per hour for being a designer, and so if I'm trying to factor in my time into the whole thing, it gets really expensive really quick.
I mean, it could be well over $100 or more a roll, maybe even more than that.
If I was charging a client $50 an hour, and it takes me an hour to scan a roll of film, then it costs me $50. I mean, in a very kind of simplistic kind of way of thinking about it. So we wanted to just kind of get an idea of what people think they're paying for a roll of film these days. I think the number came out a little over $20, and that seemed about right to us. I mean, it's kind of roughly the number that we came up with when we asked ourselves the same question. So, cool. As far as the retail price is concerned, who knows? I mean, we have to understand what our costs are going to be first.
Yeah, you're ways away.
We're still a ways away. We know that to produce film with the mini factory would be prohibitively expensive. We would have to sell it for more than people would be willing to pay for it, and blah blah blah. So we need this to create this new situation so that we can make enough film that we can produce it at a reasonable cost, and we can release it at a competitive price point. That's all I can really say.
I think that's fair enough.
It's very unlikely that we're going to be the cheapest film out there. In fact, that's not really what we want. I mean, we don't want to be perceived as making some sort of substandard product. Right. And we, but at the same time, all of us in this company are consumers on some level, and so we've had to go out and pay for a roll of film, and we know what we would be okay paying. Yeah. And all these things are going into figuring out. Plus, there's just the math of it. Okay, this costs us this much. This costs us this much. It takes us this long to make it. That equals this much cost per roll. And you take that number, you add a multiple, and that's the way business works. It's we're not trying to overcomplicate things. In fact, because we're so small, we have to simplify things in many ways. And so once we can figure out what it costs us, then we might know a retail price, and then and then it becomes a matter of do we think that this is a price that everyone is going to be okay with?
Sure. Okay.
We're not looking to push people away. We want to bring people into what we're doing, and we hope to come up with some pricing that reflects that.
I think that's really cool. Dave, thanks for coming and being on the show today. I really appreciate it. I know you probably have to get on and get some other things done. But just to kind of recap and close everything up, if you're late to the party and you're just now joining us, basically what we've been discussing today is Ferrania going into their production. And the only reason I'm reiterating is because some people are saying, well, what about black and white films? So I think they may have come in late. But what we're looking at is for the first film stock, it's going to be a color positive or color chrome film at ASA 100, available in 4 formats. And it's going to be 35 millimeter, 120, 8 millimeter, and 16 for Cine. And I think that's what we're doing. We're going to have some more news from Dave pretty quick here in the next couple of weeks. And I'll get him back on the show. We'll probably do another live thing if you want. This ended up working pretty well, I thought. I hope.
I mean, I haven't seen the questions. I don't know if we've been getting, if we've answered everything properly. But, yeah, I mean, this is not an isolated incident. We're going to make ourselves as available as we can. We, of course, have things to do to make sure that we have products to sell, but for as much as we can, we want to share this whole process with everyone. We want we feel we need to help people understand just how complicated it really is to make,
no, absolutely.
to
And
manufacture
I think
film.
it's a fun story. I mean, it's the fascinating part about it. That's what makes this so important. Is we all have a passion for this, or most of us are interested in it anyway. And it's really cool to understand, what all goes into it, because it's very interesting. I think,
Yeah, I mean, I basically I feel like in what I'm doing with Ferrania, I'm really just doing what I would want someone like me to do.
Yeah. Oh, sure, sure.
If there was some nerd that wasn't me that decided he wanted to work with a brand new film company, I would want him to say the things that made me feel comfortable with jumping into a new thing in a business that is kind of, slowly going away.
Well, let me say this. I know Dave well enough to know that if he weren't the marketing director, he'd be watching all this right now on the sidelines.
Of course.
He's the most enthusiastic fan out there. Yeah, that's a cool job for you, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, and it was easier than anyone would think. I just asked.
Yeah, that's cool.
Nicola and those guys had already had things chugging along for 5 or 6 months by the time I emailed him, and I sent him this manifesto of like, oh, this is the way it needs to work for the future. And and he read it, and he emailed me back, and everything has gone from there. So it's not like I really I don't know, I bring my passion and my experience now to the table, but those guys over in Italy, the ones that are trying to figure out how all this works,
they're sweating it out, and
they're the one, and the big reason why we haven't heard much from them over the past year is because they can't get online and talk to people for hours, because those are hours that they don't figure out exactly how this gear fits in this thing, and yeah.
I love it, Dave. Dave, thanks so much for joining us today. This has been awesome, and please come back on again. In fact, I'll tell you what, I don't know if you can commit to this now, but when you're ready to make the announcement that we're not going to talk about here, you want to come on and the next day or two, and we can discuss details.
Sure, why not?
Pimping. Yeah, that sounds fun. This worked really great.
That's what the internet's for, right?
I love it.
Yeah.
I just thought it was for making crap and sticking it up. That's what I do. All right, Dave, thank you so much, and thanks everybody for watching.
Ted.
Yeah,
thanks,
absolutely.
everybody.
This will be in the feed, and I'll let you know. Stay tuned for further announcements on this. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the broadcast, and appreciate it. And thanks, Dave, for joining us. We'll see you guys next time.